The Liberals riding high on their dental announcement. MP Pierre's at the end. Check this
all
out.
Over the world are finding things hard. There are those that stand up and provide solutions and talk about how we make things better. And I want to recognize the NDP in stepping forward and talking about solutions, about talking about answers. When we saw the Conservatives voting against dental care, voting against support for seniors, voting against support for persons with disability, voting against our children who need dental support. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations to any party that stands up for ideas and getting things done in this country.
Order.
Okay, here we have MP Scheer, but like I said, stay to the end. Pierre Poilievre.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
The Prime Minister is causing division and anger in unprecedented ways with a backlash that we may never have seen in this country before. 133 First Nations suing this Prime Minister over the carbon tax. Several provinces taking the Prime Minister to court to try to stop the tax. One province refusing to collect the tax altogether. And now the Premier of the Northwest Territories asking for a full exemption, saying, quote, the prices are just getting higher and higher here. After 8 years, it's clear the Prime Minister's not worth the cost. Will he put his ego aside and axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last week when the Conservatives had the chance to stand up for First Nations people, they voted against the measures that Indigenous communities need every single day to deliver things like clean water, Mr. Speaker, to deliver things like education, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that infrastructure is kept running and maintained, Mr. Speaker. When they had a chance to stand up with First Nations, what did they do? They voted against them.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
When they have a chance to provide relief to all Canadians and First Nations, they say, we'll see you in court, Mr. Speaker. They have succeeded, though, in uniting Canadians around one thing: their hatred for the carbon tax. As hardworking Canadians across the country visit food banks for the first time or turn their thermostats down, Northerners are really facing the sting of the carbon tax. The Premier of the Northwest Territories went on to say, quote, I mean, ideally, a complete exemption for the territory is what we would hope for because, like I said before, the costs are already high. Why won't the Prime Minister have some mercy on Canadians and axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
I think it's important that the honourable member stop misleading Canadians. Research coming out of the University of Calgary last week shows that their plan to make pollution free again will only benefit those earning over $250,000 a year and hurt almost everybody else. The Conservative leader says that he cares about affordability, but last week in the middle of the night they voted to cut affordable housing construction, cut school food program, cut dental care for the most vulnerable, cut affordable child care. Shame, shame, shame.
The honourable member from Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies.
In one of his first comments as Northwest Territories Premier, R.J. Simpson simply said yesterday a carbon tax doesn't work for Northwest Territories. And a complete exemption for the...
It must be because it's Christmas is the reason why they're all so excited. I don't know. Leave your comments below.
We
like,
will stand
subscribe.
up for our troops.
Check
We
this
will
out.
stand with our allies and partners. We will stand up for Ukraine, even if the Conservatives cut and run. Mr. Speaker, Hanson remembers. Slava Ukraine!
The honourable member from Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of Christmas dinner. His carbon tax are driving up the costs so high that Canadian households are struggling as we head into the holiday season. But what's worse is that he's planning to quadruple this tax on groceries, gas, and home heating. Instead, Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the Prime Minister axe his carbon tax so that Canadians can afford Christmas dinner?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Employment.
Mr. Speaker, in a shocking turn of events just last week, the Conservative Party held hostage the progress and investments that we continue to make in Canadians. When given the chance to support increasing the number of childcare spaces in rural and underserved communities, what did they do, Mr. Speaker? They voted against. What does this mean? This means not supporting new and much-needed childcare spaces in rural and underserved communities. Mr. Speaker, they are just not worth the risk.
The honourable member from Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, what they simply don't understand is that their plan is just not working. And it's not just Conservatives saying it. The Chiefs of Ontario, representing 133 First Nations, nearly a third of which that are located in the Kenora district, are taking this government to court, arguing that the carbon tax leaves them worse off and breaches the principles of reconciliation. So why doesn't this Prime Minister finally show some common sense and axe his tax on farmers, families, and First Nations for good?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
They spread fear and falsehoods about matters in other countries to distract people from the absolute misery they've caused here at home. We understand why they don't want to talk about how Canadians are living, because folks can't afford to feed themselves, lining up at food banks with the worst food price inflation in 40 years. And yet, the Prime Minister wants to quadruple the carbon tax with the help of his NDP junior coalition partners. Will the Prime Minister reverse his plan to quadruple the tax so Canadians can afford to eat, heat, and house themselves?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to see the opposition leader run from uncomfortable questions that are being put to him on the floor of the House of Commons. Let's look at some of the voting record that they demonstrated last week when it comes to saving people money on reducing the cost of housing. He's made clear his personal position is the government has no business investing in housing. But individual members of Parliament have the opportunity to stand up and be counted when there is a vote on the floor of the House of Commons. They said no to investments in affordable housing. They said no to thousands of apartments. They said no to housing for Indigenous communities, to emergency shelters for women and girls, and they said no to funding for homeless veterans. They should be ashamed, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We said no to doubling housing costs. They doubled housing costs. Mr. Speaker, they doubled housing costs. That's the reality. All the slogans that member wants to spit out aren't worth a hill of beans when all they've done is double housing costs. Just like they said the carbon tax would help the environment, now we know Canada has fallen 4 places to 62nd out of 67 countries in the world.
Shameful.
After they've tried to impose this carbon tax. Instead of quadrupling a tax that has failed, why won't they axe the tax and invest in technology instead?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are proud to stand up for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, last week what the Conservatives did is they voted consistently against measures that not only make life more affordable for Canadians, but help them in their time of need. 988 that was just launched with regards to suicide prevention. What did the Conservatives do? They voted against it. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to supporting victims of gender-based violence, what did the Conservatives do? Voted against it. The list goes on, Mr. Speaker. That is irresponsible. That is reckless. And quite frankly, these are right-wing extreme politics from the United States that we don't want here in Canada.
L'honorable député de La Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie.
Like, subscribe, leave your comments down below. Have a good day.